It was supposed to be just another visiting day inside a quiet state prison. Families lined up, couples reunited briefly, children hugged fathers they hadn't seen in months. But what unfolded in one corner of the visiting room would shock everyone who witnessed it. A husband, an inmate already serving time, leaned across the table to his wife. Words were exchanged, whispers turned into tense silence, and within seconds the entire room erupted in screams. By the time guards rushed over, it was too late. His wife lay lifeless on the floor. What could drive a man to commit such a brutal act in a room filled with cameras, guards, and his own family watching? Tonight, we uncover the shocking story of the visiting room murder. Welcome back to Dark Motives, where we take you deep inside the most shocking and unsettling true crime cases you'll ever hear. Tonight's case is one that stunned both the prison system and the outside world. It's the story of an inmate who discovered something about his wife that he simply could not accept, and the horrifying decision he made in a moment of rage. Before we dive in, if you're fascinated by gripping true crime stories that leave you questioning how well we ever really know the people closest to us, make sure you hit that subscribe button right now. It only takes a second, and it helps us continue bringing you powerful stories just like this one every single day. And while you're here, turn on notifications so you never miss an upload. Trust me, you don't want to miss the cases we have coming. Now, let's go back to where it all began, long before the visiting room, long before the discovery, to the love story that started it all. They met in the most ordinary of places through friends who never imagined their introduction would lead to tragedy. At first, their love seemed picture perfect. She was warm, caring, and devoted. He was charming in his own way, carrying himself with confidence even though his life had already been marked by trouble with the law. Friends recall seeing them together at family gatherings and community events. They described the couple as inseparable, always sitting close, always laughing at private jokes no one else could understand. To outsiders, they were proof that love could blossom even in unlikely circumstances. But beneath the smiles, there were shadows. He had already been in and out of the system. Run-ins with the law, minor charges that kept piling up, slowly steering him toward a prison sentence that would one day change both of their lives. Still, she stood by him. Even when friends whispered warnings, even when her family questioned her choices, she refused to walk away. To her, he wasn't just an inmate or a troubled man. He was the person she believed she could build a future with. That loyalty, that determination to hold the relationship together, became the glue that bound them. But it was also the very thing that would put her in danger later on. Because what she never imagined was that one secret, a secret she kept tightly guarded, would eventually push him over the edge. Despite the legal troubles hanging over him, the two decided to make it official. They married quickly, a small ceremony with only a handful of people present. No grand church bells, no overflowing banquet halls, just a quiet exchange of vows, filled with promises to stay together through the hardest of times. She wore a simple dress, her smile bright and unwavering. He wore borrowed clothes, standing tall beside her as though the weight of his mistakes didn't exist that day. For a moment it felt as if they had escaped reality. But reality has a way of crashing back in. Within months, his past caught up to him. Arrests, charges, a trial that dragged out longer than either of them had hoped. And when the sentence was finally handed down, she made a choice most people would never make. She chose to stay. She told him she would visit, write letters, and wait until he was free again. Still, there was something she never told him. Something she carefully tucked away, believing that if she just loved him enough, if she just kept the marriage strong, he would never need to know. It wasn't a crime. It wasn't a betrayal in the traditional sense. But it was a part of her identity that she feared he would never understand. To her, it was just her truth. To him, when it finally surfaced, it would become the one thing he could not forgive. Life behind bars has a way of magnifying everything: anger, loneliness, suspicion. For him, the prison walls weren't just made of concrete. They were built out of frustration and regret. Days turned into weeks, weeks into months. Each morning began the same. The loud clang of doors, the shuffle of inmates to the cafeteria, the constant buzz of guards watching every move. He wasn't the toughest man in the block, but he wasn't weak either. He learned how to blend in, how to keep his head down, and how to survive. The only light in that world was her. She visited as often as she could. Letters came in with her handwriting, filled with encouragement, promises, and details of the life waiting for him once he got out. Each time he saw her through the glass or across the table in the visiting room, it was like a break in the storm. But prison also breeds whispers. Other inmates talk, they joke, they pry into each other's lives. And sometimes those words sink deep. He began to hear things, little comments about his wife, cruel jokes that spread like wildfire through the block. At first, he brushed them off. But the more he heard, the more he started to wonder. Doubt began to gnaw at him. Every night in his cell, every time he replayed conversations in his head, the questions grew louder. And that doubt would soon turn into suspicion, a suspicion that would change everything when he finally confronted her. It started small, a careless word from another inmate, a half smile from a guard who seemed to know something he didn't. At first he thought it was just prison gossip, lies meant to stir trouble. But then came the letter. Not from her, from someone else. The words were sharp, cutting straight into his pride, claiming that the woman he called his wife had been keeping a part of herself hidden from him. The letter suggested that before their marriage, before he ever knew her, she had been someone different, someone he would never have chosen if he had known the full truth. He didn't believe it. He couldn't. But the whispers didn't stop. And when he pressed her during one of her visits, the look on her face told him more than words ever could. She didn't deny it. She didn't fight back with anger or outrage. Instead, she went quiet. Her silence was the answer he dreaded. For days afterward, he couldn't sleep. His cell felt smaller, the walls tighter, the voices around him louder. He replayed every memory, every conversation, every laugh, every intimate moment, and now all of it felt like a lie. To him, it wasn't just a secret. It was a betrayal of trust, a wound to his pride, and in the prison world, pride was everything. And so, the love that once gave him hope turned into something darker. By the time he walked into the visiting room again, his mind was no longer filled with warmth or longing. It was boiling with rage, and it was only a matter of time before that rage erupted in front of everyone. The next visit didn't feel like the others. From the moment he walked into the room, guards noticed something different in his demeanor. His stride was heavier, his eyes sharper, locked on her the second he spotted her at the table. She greeted him with a smile, the same way she always did, but this time, it didn't melt away his anger. He sat down slowly, leaned forward, and for the first few minutes, neither of them spoke. Other families around them chatted and laughed. Children tugged at their father's sleeves. Couples exchanged quiet words of comfort. But at their table, there was only silence. A silence so thick it drew curious glances from nearby visitors. Finally, he broke it. His voice was low, steady, but trembling beneath the surface. He asked her again. Was it true? Was what he had heard just prison gossip, or had she really kept something from him? Her hands shook as she reached across the table, trying to calm him, but her eyes betrayed her. They darted down, avoiding his. And in that moment, his worst suspicions became reality. The anger he had bottled up for weeks spilled out. He leaned closer, his voice rising just enough for the people at the next table to hear. She tried to soothe him, whispering, asking him to keep his voice down. But nothing could stop what was building. For him, it wasn't just a secret anymore. It was humiliation, betrayal, and fury wrapped into one. The visiting room, filled with guards, cameras, and families, was about to become the stage for an unthinkable act. The argument escalated in seconds. What began as tense whispers soon turned into a sharp exchange that caught the attention of nearby guards. His hands clenched into fists, his face twisted with rage, and before anyone could stop him, he snapped. He lunged across the table. The sound of chairs scraping the floor echoed through the room as she gasped, trying to push him away. Visitors screamed. Children were rushed toward the doors. Guards shouted orders, but by the time they reached him, it was too late. In full view of everyone, families, officers, and even the cameras mounted high on the walls, he attacked her with a violence no one saw coming. The love that once defined them vanished in that instant, replaced by raw fury and brutal force. She cried out, calling his name, begging him to stop. But he didn't hear her anymore. His world had collapsed into a single moment, a single act he believed was the only way to reclaim the pride he thought he had lost. Guards tackled him, pulling him off her, forcing him to the ground as he kicked and shouted. The room was chaos. Visitors crying, alarms blaring, officers rushing in. And on the floor, beneath the harsh fluorescent lights, lay his wife, still motionless and unresponsive. What had once been a routine prison visit had turned into a scene of horror that no one present would ever forget. Within minutes, the visiting room was locked down. Guards cleared the space, families were escorted out in tears, and detectives were called in immediately. A crime inside a prison is rare enough, but a murder, in full view of cameras and witnesses, demanded answers. Investigators moved quickly. They gathered statements from every corner of the room. Visitors described the tense silence before the attack, the sudden eruption of violence, and the desperate cries that followed. Guards reported how his anger had been building for weeks, though no one predicted it would end this way. The surveillance footage left no room for doubt. Every second of the attack was captured. The moment he leaned across the table, the struggle, the fatal outcome. For prosecutors, it was evidence so strong it would be impossible to fight against. But investigators wanted more than just the footage. They wanted to understand the motive. Why would a man risk everything, his freedom, his marriage, even his own life inside the prison system, to do something so reckless in a room where he was guaranteed to be caught? When questioned, he remained silent at first, but whispers from inside the block quickly spread to detectives. The secret he had discovered, the humiliation he felt, the rage he carried into that visit. To him, it wasn't just a crime of passion. It was, in his mind, a reaction to betrayal. But to the law, none of that mattered. A woman was dead. A prison had been turned into a crime scene. And now, the inmate who once looked forward to his wife's visits was facing the most serious charge of all: murder. The courtroom was packed. Journalists filled the benches. Families of both the victim and the accused sat in silence, and the atmosphere was so heavy you could feel it in the air. Everyone wanted to hear how a prison visit turned into a murder that shocked the entire state. The prosecution came prepared. They had the surveillance footage, the guard's testimony, and the accounts of dozens of visitors who had witnessed the attack firsthand. They painted him as a violent man who couldn't control his temper, someone who lashed out in the most brutal way possible. The defense tried a different angle. They argued that he had been pushed to the breaking point, that the discovery of his wife's secret had caused him unbearable emotional turmoil. They didn't deny the attack, how could they? Instead, they tried to reduce it, to frame it as a crime of passion rather than cold-blooded murder. But the jury didn't see passion. They saw deliberate violence. They saw a man who had crossed a line that could never be undone. Throughout the trial, he sat stone-faced. Some days he stared straight ahead, refusing to look at the victim's grieving family. Other days he buried his head in his hands as if the weight of what he had done was finally crushing him. When closing arguments ended, the room held its breath. The jury left, deliberated for hours, and returned with a decision that would seal his fate forever. The jury filed back into the courtroom, faces heavy with the weight of their decision. The room fell silent as the foreman stood and delivered the words that would end the case. Guilty of murder in the first degree. Gasps echoed through the room. Some shook their heads, others quietly cried. For the victim's family, it was justice, though no sentence could ever bring her back. For him, it was the end of any hope of freedom. Whatever time he was serving before, it no longer mattered. Now he would never walk out of prison again. The judge handed down the sentence swiftly. life without the possibility of parole. He showed little emotion as the words rang out, but those who looked closely said his eyes told a different story. Regret, anger, perhaps even fear. The story of the visiting room murder became a cautionary tale, a reminder of how secrets, pride, and rage can collide in ways no one can predict. A love story that began with devotion ended in tragedy, under the harsh fluorescent lights of a prison hall. And now, I want to hear from you. Where are you watching from? Drop it in the comments below. I always love seeing how far these stories travel. If you found this case as gripping as I did, make sure to subscribe so you never miss an upload. Every day we bring you true crime stories that reveal the darkest corners of human behavior. Thank you for watching Dark Motives. Until next time, stay safe and remember, not every love story ends the way it begins.